Master gardeners have a reputation of being expert gardeners, but really, there's nothing special about a master gardener. We've just received specialized training on how to garden. Hi, I'm GardenerScott, and I discuss everything gardening so that you can become a better gardener. Today, allow me to give you 3 tips on how you can garden like a master gardener. It really isn't difficult to garden like a master gardener. And when I say master gardener, I'm referring to the certified master gardeners within the United States. It's a program throughout the country conducted by different universities through the Cooperative Extension Office. And average people are just trained to become better gardeners with the intent that they'll use that knowledge and then pass it on throughout the communities. Well, in the process of going through that training, we do get extra information about plants and growing, and typically we garden a little bit better than the average person that might be stumbling through it. But that's where you come in, by just learning some of the basics of how we were trained to become master gardeners. You could become a master gardener yourself without ever having to sit through a class and get that certification. This is the class schedule from when I went through my training back in 2004, and I still have the original piece of paper. To give you an idea of the type of training that a master gardener goes through, let me give you some examples. Day 1 was introductions, explaining the program, and then we learned about climatology and the growing season. Well, that was only half a day, and it ultimately amounted to about 3 hours. So as a master gardener, I had 3 hours of instruction about the weather and the climate and how that affects growing. That was it. We never really came back to that subject. On a different day, we had introduction to plant pathology and diagnosis. So the first half of the day, about 3 hours, was plant pathology, basically recognizing the types of problems that might exist in a plant caused by disease or bacteria or a fungus or a pest. And in the second half of the day, we got to the diagnosis, basically trying to figure out if we saw a particular problem, how could we figure out what it was? And that was it, 3 hours of each. Well, this is where the first tip comes in. It's gaining knowledge. 14 weeks of a program of 3 hours for this and 3 hours for that every week gave us the opportunity to be certified as a master gardener. Well, you could easily find 3 hours of instruction online in videos on any of these specific topics. So you learn a little bit about diagnosis of plant problems by watching videos or reading blogs, or maybe just finding a book that has the information you're looking for, and you know as much as a master gardener. We did have some pretty good instructors. On one day, Introduction to Entomology, which is the study of insects, was taught by Whitney Crenshaw, who is recognized as a global expert in insects. And he's really written the definitive book on garden insects. Well, it was great to listen to him for a whole day and get some of his information. All of it came from his book. Well, I'll put a link to the book below. It is something you should have in your library. But if you just have that book and learn how to reference it, you don't need to sit and listen to Whitney Crenshaw explain what's in it. You'll have the same information that I received when the author taught the class. These are some of the other topics that were taught during that 14-week course. On day 2, we had Master Gardener Orientation and Vegetables. The first half of the day was just telling us what they expected of us as a master gardener, and then 3 hours of vegetables. Well, that was it. Most of us are doing vegetable gardening, and master gardeners only get 3 hours of instruction on how to grow vegetables. We had soils, fertilizers, and soil amendments, introduction to plant pathology and diagnosis, woody plants, tree fruits, small fruits, turf grass management, irrigation management, water-wise gardening, insect ID and diagnosis, herbaceous perennials, noxious weeds, landscape weeds, conifer identification, and native plants. So you can see this was a very broad education. We really didn't focus on any area in particular. And most master gardeners end up focusing after they get through a course like this. One of my friends, a master gardener, expert in growing perennials, really can't grow vegetables much at all because she only got 3 hours of instruction and she hasn't pursued that section. So she has a very small vegetable garden. I've tried to pursue as much of this as possible so that I can broaden my overall knowledge base, but ultimately, master gardeners just learn a little bit about a whole bunch of things. What you can do is learn a lot about a few things and then put it into practice. And that's the second tip, is you don't have to learn everything. Just learn what you need to know for what you're doing and then do what you've learned. And doing what I had learned, putting it into practice, was really the best part about the Master Gardener training. They really stressed a knowledge-based education. And then moving forward using research-based recommendations when it came to deciding what to do in the garden. And to be certified, I had to do at least 50 hours of volunteer activity. That was activity focused on helping the basic gardener, answering questions, teaching classes, just getting that research-based recommendation out to the public. Well, I learned so much during that time period. All of us did. Most of it was spent at the help desk. And if you look in your local community within the United States, you will probably find a Master Gardener help desk. So if you've got a problem that you just can't get an answer to, or you just don't know what to do, you can go find a Master Gardener, ask your question, and expect to get a knowledgeable answer. Now, when someone would ask a question, often I didn't know the answer right then. I would have to research it. And that was a critical component of the Master Gardener program, was learning to research a problem. Not just accept an answer because you heard that somebody did it this way, but to actually find research-based recommendations. You can do this too. If you've got something in your garden that just doesn't make sense, or you want to learn how to do something a little differently, well, you can do the research on how to do it the right way. You don't have to go to a help desk, though it's a great option. You can get the information yourself. And that's how I've set up a lot of my videos, is providing you the information that has a basis in research. So look for that type of information and you'll already be thinking like a master gardener. And as you put what you learn to practice and start doing it, step back and start observing and analyzing, and then continue to question at every step of the process. And that's the third tip, is questioning everything you're doing about gardening. I learned at the help desk that there's no such thing as a dumb question. It might be phrased in such a way that the meaning is hidden, but when you start breaking down the individual components of what the problem is, you can really then start figuring out what the solution is. So you need to look at a problem and ask, what is the plant? How much sun does it get? How much water does it get? What kind of fertilizer? What kind of soil? What kind of climate? If you break it down to those individual components, suddenly you begin to see how simple plants are when they grow. And if you can identify the one thing that's a little bit different than all the other plants, well, then maybe that's where you can highlight your attention and identify the problem. And so it works the other way. When you start figuring out all of these individual components and what might be going wrong, use it to your benefit. When something's really going well, start breaking it down and identify why this plant is doing better than another plant. That's the way master gardeners garden, is they break down the gardening to individual components and then improve each of those components. And they continually ask, why? This wood pile that I have a few weeks ago was swarming with bees, and I'd never seen that before. So I asked why, just to broaden my education. And then I started doing some research to find out why were bees all over this wood. And what I figured out was we had just come over a really cold patch of weather and suddenly had a very warm day. The wood was sweating. It was releasing some of that water that had been frozen inside. There aren't a lot of water sources in my area, and the bees were on this wood lapping up that moisture. And there was a little bit of research that substantiated that. So now, as I look forward, I start thinking in terms of not making a wood pile for my bees, but in early spring, definitely providing them with a water source. Because I saw a bee on a piece of wood and then figured out how I can modify my gardening to benefit the insects that I want in my garden. As I said earlier, master gardeners really aren't special. We've just learned to gain a little knowledge, put it into practice, and then continually question what we're doing. You can do the same thing. And when you do that, it builds experience. And master gardeners tend to be more experienced. And that experience brings confidence. And that's what enables master gardeners to be the ones that are up front teaching gardening classes. Well, you have that same capability. Just start asking why when things go wrong. And before you immediately turn to a master gardener to get the answer, see if you can figure out the answer yourself. And that'll put you on the journey to becoming a master gardener. You don't need a certificate to have achieved that point. You just need plants in your garden that are successful. And the success comes because you know why they're successful by breaking it down into those individual components. If you want to become a better gardener, well then consider clicking on one of these videos to help you on your journey. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.